Scotland today. Let's hand over now to Zara.
Thank you very much. Well, we have plenty to talk about this week, including Peter Capaldi in the new Black Mirror. But is science fiction getting too close to reality? And have you ever broken up with a pal? We navigate those tricky waters of ending a friendship. Welcome to Saturday mornings on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Zara Janjua, in for Shereen this week. My guests today are journalist Hannah McGill, public relations professional Murray MacDonald, and Martin Raymond of Cloudline PR. Hello, good morning to you all.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Lovely to have you with us. Now, this week we're talking about the brand new Black Mirror starring Peter Capaldi, but is science fiction getting a little bit too close to reality? As one company bans workers from checking their text messages during meetings, are you too easily distracted? Plus, have you ever broken up with a pal? We navigate the tricky waters of ending a relationship. And as David Tennant reflects on the power of I love you, we'll consider the power of those three little words. Plus, there's much more to come. Let's have a listen to some of this week's big moments. Moments.
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know? They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid, unlike these champions.
He just had this grand vision.
You hatch one. You'll nurture and you'll care for it until it replicates life itself.
It alters your neuronal structure. The mind is a computer.
Even when my parents were dying, it was so hard to say, I love you. And it's quite sad. I found it difficult and they didn't really say it back. And that's not because they didn't. It's just because it's just an upbringing. It's just a way of being.
When he first came out of prison, I thought, maybe I'll get my dad back. Maybe he's still a good person. But now, he's just some angry deaf man going around getting into fights.
You need to get Daniel Brennan back in prison.
Hello? Yes? Officer Dibble? Well, this is his answering service. May I take a message?
All right, Top Cat, on your feet.
My name is Gare.
and I'm addicted to chips.
All that and more to come here on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Zara Janjua. And do get in touch with your thoughts on anything we're talking about this morning. You can drop me a text on 80295. That's charged at your standard message rate. Or, of course, you can WhatsApp us 08085 92 95 00. But first, if you're a fan of Mad Men, and in particular Jon Hamm's performance as Don Draper, our first TV pick this week might be a bit of a box set treat for you. Landing on Apple TV yesterday, Your Friends and Neighbours sees Hamm back in the same kind of role for the first time in 10 years since Mad Men ended, playing New York hedge fund manager Andrew Cooper. After being fired in disgrace, Cooper resorts to stealing from his neighbours' homes in the affluent Westmount village, only to discover that the secrets hidden behind the wealthy facades may be more dangerous than he could have imagined. Let's get a flavour.
How are the kids?
Oh, they're fine.
Wife?
Ex-wife.
Well, I gotta deliver some bad news. You're fired.
What? Viewed from a certain perspective, life boils down to a series of interconnected decisions. You get the house, the cars, the stuff. But how the hell could everything go so wrong so fast? I just need to know how long I could float on what I got.
6 months, tops.
I'd been thinking. These houses have all this stuff no one would miss for a while, if ever.
Rich guy loses his big job, has liquidity problems, turns to petty crime. That's not savvy, that's stupidity.
Maybe it's just desperation.
That's the first honest thing you've said. I'll give you 65 for it.
What'd you get up to last night?
Oh, not much.
Ooh, well, it sounds like it could be a blockbuster, Murray. Tell us a little bit about the drama.
Yes, I think it will be very popular. And I think Apple TV's onto a good one here. In fact, I understand they've already commissioned a second series.
Wow.
So they are predicting it's going to be huge, even though it's only been out for one day. So I managed to watch the first 2 episodes last night, and I am hooked on it already. One, Jon Hamm's in it, which kind of helps. But it does, I guess, as a man approaching a certain age myself, I would not say I'm not midlife yet. Well, I probably am really, but never mind. But it does feel kind of a bit like midlife crisis type of series going on here. But the programme starts in a pretty bloody way. The opening scene where there's blood all over the floor. Jon Hamm wakes up, appears to maybe not quite know how he's got in this situation, and there's a dead body next to him. And then he does the worst cover-up of a blood scene you've ever seen. Like, he manages to use his top and actually splatters blood everywhere. So it's like DNA incrimination all over the shop. So he's clearly going to get caught. But then in kind of style that's being used a lot recently, that is in the future. And then we skip back, I can't remember how long, 4 months or something like that, to, and I guess the first series is going to be the story about how successful businessman Coops ends up in a bloody mess on the floor there. And that's the premise of where it goes.
And Hannah, a fan of Jon Hamm? I think I know the answer to this.
No. She just recently returned to Mad Men, having kind of remembered in that way that you do sometimes that I never completely finished it, that I never got to the end of the final series. And I was thinking about him and how when he signed up for Mad Men, he was not well known at all. And they deliberately largely cast that show with people who were unrecognizable. And so it was a big gamble having to find somebody who was able to be a complete star straight out the gate. And, they got that person who could do that. But it was such a it was a role that was talked about so much and analysed so much. And it went on for so long. And he was such an emotionally buttoned up character that actually you felt like Jon Hamm got to the end of it and it was hard to know what was going to happen to him. And Julie, he didn't really have like a big major movie career, and there's been a wait for what he would do. And you don't want to put too much pressure on this particular show because Mad Men was a phenomenon. But this is clearly a role where he's happy and comfortable. He's clearly been involved in sort of developing this for himself as well, which is a power that you can have. Like Jennifer Aniston with The Morning Show, which is also on Apple, these huge stars. And that can be a problem because you can end up with something that is too tailored to the person. But this was funny. American sort of television is obsessed with these ideas about the crisis of wealth and the crisis of the wealth gap and the crisis of men who have been cancelled.
Well, I
to
mean,
one extent or another.
he does have a very distinctive presence, doesn't he, as an actor?
He does.
I wonder how Martin, other cast members perhaps measure up to him in this, or, you know, how do they bounce off him? Did you enjoy their performances?
I enjoyed the whole thing. I thought it was great. I only watched one episode, and we've discussed many times when we're doing reviews here the difficulty of the first episode, because you think, oh, there's so much context, there's so much, but it's got to hook you. And, you know, we've discussed this many, many times, but I only watched one, and I thought it was almost like the perfect first episode because it gave you enough context that you knew what was going on here. Now, I've been through my midlife crisis, let me tell you. And it's fine. It's fine. I came through without a scratch. It's fine. Don't you worry about it. And there is a bit that's like, midlife crisis, and there's a story here about redemption and understanding. And I think, I've heard this before, but I actually find this really fresh and original. There's cliches in here, of course. The wife runs off with a basketball player. The son, who's a teenager, is completely non-communicative. I'd like to see a teenager in a drama who's over-communicative. That would be much more interesting. But the support cast are great. Amanda Peet is his wife, or technically speaking, his ex-wife. She is absolutely fabulous. She's great. And the small bit parts, even like in that clip, his boss who fires him, it's a tiny little part, but it's absolutely brilliant and it's perfect. It's really, really well done. I love the setting. Funnily enough, I just finished watching The Wolf of Wall Street on Netflix, and
well, there's similarities because of that narration, isn't there?
Very, very similar,
yes.
and that kind of whole thing about being a satire around capitalism and masculinity, and you know, we talk about toxic masculinity a lot now, of course, but it's really interesting to see a show like this and a drama that kind of it starts to explore that in a little bit more sophistication, a little bit more detail. So I loved it a lot. And of course, for those of us who don't have a mansion in Westchester County, wherever it is in Long Island, it's deeply reassuring to know that rich people have terrible, empty lives, and that the grimness of getting up each morning to look at your swimming pool,
Martin.
It's just terrible. So it's a good show from that point of view.
You'd rather cry on a yacht, though, wouldn't you?
I've been on yachts. No, not necessarily.
Murray?
He's over yachts. He's over his midlife crisis and he's over yachts.
I've had my yacht phase, thanks.
I think Martin picks on something there in terms of there's lots in this, and I think there's lots that will attract different people to it. So there's obviously kind of the story about rich people, there's the story about kind of the glamorous life, there's the wife and the affairs and everything, but the corporate bit I think is fascinating too, which I guess is Mad Men-y in a way, because it's going in, and Wolf of Wall Street, it's going to corporate life, but the story that begins to pan out in the second episode is digging into why he got sacked. And actually, the person who he was allegedly having a fling with didn't actually make a complaint in the end. And it's kind of like, so it's beginning to pan out. So it's not a typical kind of Me Too type thing where he's been a bad person. I don't think it is a spoiler.
Goodness.
But
it's not for me. I haven't seen the second episode
well,
yet.
it's just not a typical... it's not going to go where you think it is necessarily, and you can see. So it's taking the Me Too thing on a slightly
I certainly don't want you to give away any more than that.
No, I'm very bad for that.
I'm wondering if it's the kind of thing you would, stick with, or does it just hit you right? Do you think from that first episode? Because, like you said, Martin, it makes an impact, doesn't it? It's almost a masterclass, really, in how to deliver a first episode of the series.
It's beautifully written. I mean, I did love the script. I thought it was really, really cleverly done. And the writer, a guy called Jonathan Tropper, I read a thing there where he said, this is all based in the place where I live in Long Island. And I thought, well, good luck with the neighbours from now on. That's
Everyone's getting new locks for their doors now.
I mean, it is amazing that a lot of people in these very wealthy places do not have security systems in their homes. But then it does help to create a little bit of drama. We've actually had a text come in that says John Hamm was also in the excellent Landman with Billy Bob Thornton and Demi Moore just a few months ago. Did anyone see that?
No, I haven't seen that.
So
I have seen him in a few other things.
So Landman, there is this fantastic scene with him in a hot tub outside. Hannah, if you're a fan of John Hamm, please watch.
I don't know why you're pointing that out to me and not Murray. Murray's equally as interested in John Hamm in a hot tub, I'm sure.
You are correct.
And I have to say this is all a bit sexist, quite frankly, honestly.
Well, thank you for providing balance and keeping us in check before we get too carried away with ourselves. Well, it sounds great. And that is, of course, Your Friends and Neighbours, which is available on Apple TV+.
6:30, 6:30, 6:30, 6:30, 6:30, 6:30, 6:30. We now start at 6:30. The Chris Moyle Show. We hope you got the message.
Still to come here on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Zara Janjua. We reflect on President Trump's partial U-turn on tariffs and how rude is it to check your phone messages whilst chatting to someone in real life. We'll be asking that very shortly. But first, I'm here with my guests, Hannah McGill, Martin Raymond and Murray MacDonald, and it's time to get our moments of the week. Now, Martin, you've been having, well, I don't know, was it time off? Was it a staycation? Was it a local holiday? Tell us what you've been up to.
Well, I know there's quite a lot of, as the kids say nowadays, discourse around what a staycation actually means. I'm a hardcore old school, and a staycation is you're in your house and you go on little day trips.
But that's just time off, isn't it?
No, not if it's a week. No.
Wow.
So I
what
went.
do you think about that, everyone?
I went on what is somewhere between a staycation and a kind of holiday, but it's about the shortest distance holiday I think I've ever been on. I went to a little village called Balquidder up in West Perthshire, which is not far from where I grew up. I grew up in Callander, so just up the road a little bit. But it's an hour drive from my house, so I've never gone on a holiday that's such a short distance. And let me tell you, I can recommend this highly. It's got huge advantages. So you don't have to worrying about your packing list if you have taken everything I need, because if you forget something, you just go home for it. If the weather is terrible, you just go home again. You've got this really short car journey. It's absolutely fabulous. And so we went up there. Lovely house, had its own duck pond. My dog loved it. My dog sat at the big windows looking out, watching the ducks come wandering up to the windows.
It was a good week for it, well planned.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to say the great advantage of all of this was the fact that it was spectacular weather, absolutely spectacular. So, you don't have to sit in an airplane for 10 hours, let me tell you, to have a good time.
Oh, well, but then, there's a world out there, isn't there? Which, Murray, you found out about this week, didn't you?
There is. So I guess my moment of the week is still happening. So my brother, his wife and family came down last night to stay with us for the weekend. They live up in Inverness. And so it's great to see them. And also it's great that we've got good weather for it, because I think last time they came it was not so good, and that does make a difference to what you can do. But yeah, last night, so my brother and his wife arrived and they dumped the kids and they promptly ran into Glasgow for the night. And
did you know this was going to be the plan?
We did. We knew it was a plan. But it's the first time, so because we don't live near each other, I've never really babysat. And when I say babysat, they are now 10 and 13, so I mean, it's not really babysitting at all.
So what does it involve?
Not a lot, it turns out. So basically,
watching on the TV.
It turns out my uncling skills were not really required to any great degree. So I had to cook dinner, which was chicken nuggets and pizza. And beyond that, they kind of pretty much looked after themselves. And I, of course, watched television programmes to
But it's
review
so
today.
important, isn't it, to have that time with them when they're younger. I've got plenty of nieces and nephews now, and I think building that time, just having the time with them is really important. I mean, I also think they'll be the ones that look after me when I get a bit older. So there's
that's very,
yes,
very
as someone who
Forward
hasn't
planning.
got kids, it's kind of Maisie and Martha, we are going to be relying on you to look after
nice
us.
and clear, isn't it? Now, Hannah, listeners may obviously hear that you're not joining us in the studio at the moment. You are at
Sadly
home,
not.
aren't you?
Sadly not. Yeah, I've been having a forced staycation and forced time with my lovely children because unfortunately they spent the first week of their Easter holidays in this spectacular weather being really, really unwell with one of these mad vomiting bugs that has come along in the last few years that I'm sure didn't exist when I was a kid, but now they do. Somehow my husband and I both managed to not catch it, thank God, but we have been sort of in this strange mini pandemic being quite quarantined because I didn't want to give it to anyone. That's one of the reasons I haven't come in, because obviously holiday time and kids in childcare. And so, I didn't want to take that risk. But it has meant that, been very indoors. And I've also been teaching over Zoom, and I'm now doing this over Zoom. So I do feel as if I'm in a mini pandemic, and I haven't seen any real humans for quite a while. But what I was doing over... what I was doing over Zoom was... I sometimes teach groups of American students, not necessarily undergraduate age. These tend to be older people who study forms of European culture in their spare time. And so I do some cinema teaching. And this week was introducing a group of students who most of them had never heard of it, let alone seen it, but a film called I Know Where I'm Going, which a lot of listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with. It's a film from 1945 made by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger on the Isle of Mull. And part of this is a consumer recommendation. I often point this out to people that a lot of really great cinema, older cinema, is available online for free and so I Know Where I'm Going. You can watch it if you feel like it today, once it starts raining later on. It's an absolutely beautiful film, and it is quite concerned with the Scottish weather. It is all about a love affair, a potential love affair that is one love affair that is doomed and another that is begun because of bad weather.
We'll get that on our
west
watch
coast
list
of Scotland. So it's a beautiful film, and it was just really lovely introducing some people to it who know a lot about cinema, but who sort of said, this is a brand new classic that we're not aware of, because Powell and Pressburger are quite celebrated and well known in this country, but not necessarily across the rest of the world. So that's just a recommendation, and also a plea for help, because I have been indoors for a long time.
You need some human interaction. Now listen, before we move on, have you, of course, been basking in this beautiful, glorious weather this week? Well, here's how things were looking on Thursday.
Good evening to you. Yes, today there was sunshine pretty much the length and breadth of the country. It was the warmest day of the year so far, as we've heard. And North East Scotland was our hotspot, with temperatures just shy of 23 Celsius after a very low starting point of -3.
That was Gillian Smart bringing us the weather update on Thursday, the hottest day of the year so far in Scotland, and a remarkable swing in temperature in the northeast from -3 to 22 degrees. Just amazing, isn't it, Martin? I mean, obviously you say that you had this staycation, you were slightly further up north. What was it like having this weather this week for you in terms of unexpected? Because it was just, 4 or 5, no, maybe a bit more than that now, 6 years ago, was it? Beast from the East was around about this time, and yet here we are with all this lovely weather, topping up the tan. I did notice that our producer Matt actually came in with a wonderful tan today, so he's been spending lots of time in his garden.
Yeah, very suspicious.
And working very hard, he says, yeah.
It's a bit like on the surface of the moon, isn't it? Where if you're on one side of a rock, it's 1,000 degrees centigrade heat, and then if you're in the shadow of the rock, it's -1,000 degrees. It's like, and not just between night and day in Scotland just now, but if you go into the shadows, suddenly it's quite cold. Now I'm the forest correspondent here. I've been taking my dog into the woods, and I can report on the dry grass that's there. It's all tinder dry, and so it's not surprising there's a kind of fire warning.
Well, yes, of course, because the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have urged the public to act responsibly as an extreme wildfire warning remains in place across the country. Over the last few days, firefighters have been working to tackle a number of blazes across Scotland. The wildfires and these wildfire warnings, did it give you pause for thought, Murray?
Well, we definitely are seeing more of them. There's always been wildfires, and I think in the past, lots of them in Scotland were started when they're burning the moors for grouse and stuff like that, and they get out of hand. But the reality is, at this time, it's not uncommon at this time of year for it to be a dry patch, and therefore the grass and stuff to be very flammable. But I think the trouble is, we do obviously have climate change going on, but on top of that, I think people are more careless, and there's also people doing it on purpose as well. So there's a mix of things going on there, but it is a problem. I mean, where we were, I didn't see it myself, but the hill behind us, so near Inverkip, that was apparently all ablaze, and it covered the Clyde. So the ships were using the foghorns and stuff for a while to get through it. So it is a problem. It is, and I do get annoyed at the carelessness of people.
Well, it's not been long since we saw the wildfires in California and the scale of the impact and devastation that caused. It's it's hard to imagine that sort of taking place here in Scotland, but certainly that seems to be the warnings we're having.
Right, it's
at
right
the moment.
outside our windows here. The hills outside of I live in Biggar, and there is both the moor burning and the extremely dry landscape, and the carelessness that you mentioned, Murray. So yeah, it's very up close to where I am, and distinctly concerning. Yeah.
Well, very, very close to home, I think, at the moment. And just a reminder that was a warning from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to act responsibly. With my guests Hannah McGill, Martin Raymond and Murray MacDonald. Now, this time last week, US President Donald Trump and his White House team had insisted they were fully committed to their decision to impose sweeping reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries. Then on Tuesday, they initially denied reports that the president was considering a 90-day pause, news that had triggered a brief stock market surge. But now that pause on higher tariff rates, with a few notable exceptions, is a reality. On Wednesday afternoon, Trump acknowledged that the markets had looked pretty glum and that people were getting a little queasy.
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know? They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid, unlike these champions, because we have a big job to do. No other president would have done what I did. No other president. I know the presidents, they wouldn't have done it. And it had to be done. What was happening to us on trade, not only with, you know, if you look at it, not only with China, but China was by far the biggest abuser in history, and others also, but somebody had to do it. They had to stop because it was not sustainable.
The White House has said that going big on tariffs and then hitting the pause button before entering negotiations with individual countries was the plan all along. And indeed, the White House is now in the midst of a trade war with China, placing tariffs of up to 145% on Chinese goods. China has hit back with 125% tariff on US products. Martin, was this predictable?
Yeah, I think it was, because it's very much Donald Trump's way of doing things. I mean, I don't think there's anything more complicated around Donald Trump than the fact that I think he feels that he's got a very short space of time to make these huge changes, because he's got all of the political and to an extent legal levers of power currently, but may only have them till 2026 when the midterm elections come along. So I think this is one of the reasons why we're getting these kind of really dramatic approaches. But it just seems to me to be the complete opposite of what you should be doing. The job of government, I think, is to make change, but to make change in a way that is predictable and is planned, and where you keep everybody informed of what you're doing, because the one thing business needs is that kind of level of certainty, and this seems to upend all of that. And I know that, you know, on one level in his head and amongst his inner circle, that is the plan. But I read somewhere that this whole thing was a bit like the Vietnam War, but except for economics, where you make a choice to go to war. And it's not just to go to war with China. I mean, at the beginning of the week, he was at war with everybody, essentially. And it's a war that you cannot win. He cannot win it on this kind of level. Yes, he can get people to negotiate, but there's other ways of getting people to negotiate, I think. So the whole thing seems to me to be counter what the role of government is. You can criticize globalization. I mean, you know, it's hard to defend in some ways. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if you want to dismantle globalization, you're not going to do it in a week. And that's the thing. And I think the damage, even if there are objectives that are met in this, in terms of, you know, manufacturing is not going to come back. Manufacturing is changing completely anyway. Soon we won't need any people doing manufacturing. But even if you consider the objectives to be worthwhile, the problem is the cost of all of this. And it's not just the cost to the bond market and all the other markets and everything. It's the cost to the reputation of the United States as being a country that you can trust and that is reliable and that has allies and can work with people. And that's where I think the comparison to the Vietnam War is quite interesting, because that was the point in the 60s where the kind of trust and the kind of values that people had come to attach to the United States dwindled away, and people saw the country as being somehow diminished. And I think that's the danger here, is that in the long term, Trump and his little circle, they have undermined so much of the trust and the values that people associate. The idea of America, which is really attractive to lots of people, even people who don't like American politics. The idea of America is something that a lot of people, including myself, I think, have bought into over the years. Undermined here.
Yeah, let's ask you, Murray, because, Martin mentioned there the trade war, or avoiding this trade war, which is very much the way things looked to have been going when the tariff announcement was made. Do you think this U-turn, this potential U-turn, does it move us away from that? And what happens in the case of China?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, I think Trump had to react to how the markets were reacting and how the bond markets were reacting, because it was having a big impact on
trillions were lost.
Not just in the market, but also in terms of the government debt and their ability to repay it, and the rates going up for them. But I think one of the things that lots of us are struggling with, including myself to some extent, is that we are once again seeing countries using power in a way that they haven't done for a long time. We have lived, arguably for the last 50 years, if not longer, in a relatively peaceful, settled time. And that is coming to an end, kind of whether we like it or not. And that is being forced by countries like Russia, like China, like Iran. So that there are movements going on. And there is an argument, and I think it's one of the arguments within Trump's circle, that they as a country and we as the West are not ready for that. And if we don't make these big moves, and some of it is, Martin is right, some of the moves you're making, he is doing quickly because he's not got long to do them, potentially, although he does want to go for a third term, but that's a different argument. But also because he feels he needs to move quickly to to rewire the world order, to make it more in favour of where he wants to be, because the AI is upending things, and it's going to continue to do that. It's going to upend services. And so he is going, well, we need to onshore stuff. We need to manufacture in the US again, so that China can't hold us hostage, effectively. I mean, you've got the same Panama Canal. One of the reasons he's talking about taking over the Panama Canal is because he's concerned that China owns a company that manages it, and he doesn't want them to constrain their trade. So there is a lot of sensible thinking behind some of it.
I mean, you've mentioned the disruption there, both those kind of micro and macro factors that exist, all the kind of big world stuff that's changing, technology and social environment and everything. Hannah, one columnist actually said that the president is wedded to chaos. So actually really thrives and really enjoys this type of drama that's being created. What are your thoughts? What's your reflection on that?
Yeah, I think he enjoys definitely drama, and definitely there is that fast-moving thing. I'm not sure it's as chaotic as some people think. I think there is ideology behind it. I think the ideology is a little confused, but aspects of it are things that people have been saying for many years, like that, it's a very unhealthy situation when corporations outsource all their manufacturing to places where people will work for $2 a day, and thus we all know that these are that this was a system that was wired to blow at some point, or that needed serious challenge. Now, I'm not saying that the way that Donald Trump is challenging it is the best or most sane or sensible way, but I don't think it's sheer chaos either. I think it's founded in an idea of a different kind of use of power, as Murray says. He doesn't want an America that's everybody's friend anymore. He wants an America that is seen as better. It's the idea of supremacy that I think we have great difficulty dealing with, because we've sort of come through an era where it wasn't cool to say that your country was better than other people's countries. So the supremacy aspect is sort of in poor taste. We don't like the idea of it, but a lot of Americans looking on do like the idea of it, and so that is a strong argument that he can have, except that it begins to very obviously impact people's day-to-day lives very quickly, which is why there has had to be this reset, this very quick sort of backing down. But I think the key thing is that for all that you might support the idea of it's what Martin said, if you're going to dismantle globalization, you need an alternative system. You need there to be the infrastructure for manufacturing in that country and the setup for people to train to do those jobs that are currently outsourced. And that's the sort of thing that is not going to happen overnight. So what goes in that gap? He's also working alongside people, these Silicon Valley sort of tech bro billionaires, who the last thing that they want is to improve manufacturing standards or pay and conditions for workers, because their entire business ethos is based on cost cutting and racing to the bottom. So there's very confused stuff just within his own administration about what people believe about economics.
And you're seeing that clash in sensibilities.
Between him and his big buddy Elon Musk. I mean, Elon Musk has to get out of there soon anyway because he's not allowed to keep working as a government advisor for free. But this is absolutely against how Elon Musk made his money. Elon Musk made all his money by undercutting everything, sacking as many workers as he could, giving as little rights and protections to workers as possible. That's how the whole tech sector makes all its money.
Well, you know, the impact
so these are all quite
of this has been quite severe. And even in the news today, MPs and peers were arriving at Westminster this morning for an emergency sitting of Parliament as the government aims to save British Steel's Scunthorpe plant from imminent closure. The government hopes to pass a law that would allow it to take control of the Lincolnshire site and stop its Chinese owner from closing its blast furnaces. What are your thoughts on this, Martin? Should it be nationalised, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing feels slightly performative with a Saturday debate. It's either chaotic or performative. But I mean, I've heard the arguments that they say that the owners were acting in bad faith and so on. So you have to take that at face value. I think it probably is the right thing to do. I'm kind of ambiguous about nationalisation. I think there's things that should definitely be nationalised. The utilities should all be nationalised: rail and water and electricity, gas and so on. These are national. At the core of the national economy, and they should be directed by an electable government. I think that's always been my view. I'm less sure about some other areas, but I think that the idea of a kind of partnership between government, because I do see the strategic benefits of having a steel manufacturer. I don't disagree that there are these real flaws in the globalization where you cannot depend on other countries and supply chains that were dependent on a couple of hours here and there, or the whole thing starts to fall apart. Ridiculous in the modern context. So I think the government is doing the right thing here, and if it is a partnership between private industry and the government, that would seem to me to be the best way forward.
Interesting. Hannah, briefly, your thoughts?
Yeah, I grew up not far from Scunthorpe, and you only have to look at the sort of devastation that has occurred across the north of England and Scotland and Wales as well, in terms of just people's loss of labour and that not being replaced. And it is the same question that we're talking about in America. It's all very well to tell people that you're going to, make everything more efficient for the country, but there has to be some sort of provision for what happens to people's lives and work. And it's all very complicated, especially when you factor in trying to move away from fossil fuels and, damaging production processes. But what else do we have a government for if not to sort of step in and try and control the loss of important industries and the loss of important profits? And so, yeah, even if it's a bit of a stopgap or a bit of a partial response, it's the sort of thing that has to be figured out.
Well, we'll definitely be keeping an eye on this story, and I'm sure, no doubt, we'll be talking about it again in the weeks to come.
What's getting you talking?
Here's a contentious one for us. Does it annoy you when you're mid-flow in conversation with someone and they glance down at their phone to read a notification? Or worse, maybe they start scrolling through an entire message, maybe even replying to it. Well, it's something that financial giant JP Morgan has cracked down on this week, with bosses telling employees to make meetings count and to give them 100% attention. CEO Jamie Jamie Dimson said, I see people in meetings all the time who are getting notifications and personal texts who are reading emails. This has to stop. It's disrespectful. It wastes time. Now, I did say it was going to be quite contentious, and I suspect the panel today are going to deliver on this. So let's go to you first, Murray. What do you think? Are you a texter? Would you pick up your phone and message if we were sitting having a chat or out having a drink?
So, well, first of all, Jamie Dimon, he does his annual letter to shareholders, and it's always a good read. It's a long read, but there's lots of other stuff in it too, and it is worth having a look at. And some of it is his kind of guide to business. But on this one, I had a lot of sympathy with him, but I'm also a hypocrite, and I'm happy to admit that. So I will often in a meeting, a Teams meeting or something like that, less so in a real meeting, to be honest, but in a Teams meeting, I would quite often either look at my text, sometimes personal, sometimes work, or look at other messages and emails coming up. And you know what? If I'm not particularly engaged, I will sometimes maybe browse the internet or something and have a look at something else going on. So I do admit that I will do it. But equally, if it's a meeting that I am very engaged in, and maybe it's my meeting and I want to speak to people about something, I do get bit annoyed when I see someone clearly not engaging with, not necessarily with what I'm saying, but with what the people in the team are saying. So there is something in it, and it is nearly a daily argument my husband and I have in the house over kind of use of phones when other one's speaking or one person not concentrating, quite often me, or even like texting at dinner table and stuff like that as well. So you can get into that whole thing, but I'm really happy to admit that I'm a hypocrite on it. So it really annoys me when someone does it, but I do it too.
I mean, Martin, is this not just the world that we live in now, that everything has to be so quick and responsive, and, you know, things come up that need our attention? Should we be available at all times? I mean, are you a texter in meetings?
Yeah, no, I'm keeping my eye on Hannah, though. You know, see if we drift off. Yeah, no, I find myself shoulder to shoulder with Jamie Dimon here, who's apparently a great anti-woke warrior in the Elon Musk, but I'm shoulder to shoulder with him on this particular one, and I do think it is disrespectful in a face-to-face meeting, because there's always that when somebody else is texting, or it's like there's somebody more interesting on the phone than you, moi. And so it is, I find it not just disrespectful, upsetting. But I'm very conscious that, I don't know, Jamie here, he's 68. So, you know, I think there's a generational thing here. I think under maybe even about 50, people are much more tolerant of phones and interconnectedness. And it's people who have not kind of grown up with that, and whose concept of kind of meeting etiquette is much more about focusing. But I'm a great doodler and maker of notes, and I thought, is there a difference then between that and being on your phone? Because, you know, you can make notes on your phone. And I thought, no, it's the fact it's interactive. It's the fact there's somebody else out there who may be more interesting than you are. But maybe that's just my insecurities. I don't know.
There are a lot of meetings, though, aren't there, Hannah? And, you know, is it something that, you know, we should be a bit smarter about in terms of, you know, not having those kind of expectations of people?
I do think it's definitely generational in that I think there is a different attitude to sort of checking facts or dates, or, you know, it used to be, because if one is quite old, one remembers meetings prior to there being instantaneous information at your fingertips, and one remembers meetings after. And it used to be that you would kind of go, right, you go and look into that, work on that, and we'll come back and meet about this again. Whereas now you can say, oh, I'll just check that right now. And so things can happen live in the moment that used to take 5 more meetings. So that's a good thing that also requires connectivity. And I do think younger people are much more accustomed to the idea that it's not rude to just immediately go, I'll just look into that now. But there may be an issue also with just maybe meetings. What we expect from meetings sort of comes from that prior era where we needed to sit down with each other and all look at each other and go, you go off and do that, you go off and do that, you go off and do that. And there's a slight mismatch now with the instantaneousness of information and what a meeting is for. So partly it's like maybe we are still shaking out what we actually need to have meetings about, and the classic terrible workplace thing of meetings about meetings about meetings. And that is when people get bored and start looking at their phones as well. So I don't know. I think there's probably a few things going on here. I will say, though, that my loathing of meetings is a large part of why I am freelance and work on my own now. Because
I would agree with you there.
Really
and to be perfectly honest, Hannah, I don't think I would last 5 minutes in JP Morgan.
This is Shereen on BBC Radio Scotland.
Now, it's still to come here on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Zara Janjua. Have you ever tried to break up with a friend? How did it go? And we review the brand new series of Black Mirror, Peter Capaldi's guest star. But is it getting a little bit too close to reality? Now, in many ways, BBC One's new Sunday night thriller is pretty conventional. Daniel Brennan is leaving prison after 10 years inside and is now a man on a mission for revenge. Shunned by his parents and community, Brennan has nothing left to lose until he's reunited with his estranged daughter. But where this drama differs is the way it tells the story. So lead character Daniel's deaf and the dialogue is a blend of spoken English and British Sign Language with a very, very clever use of subtitles. The resulting action takes part equally in a world of deaf people and the hearing world. So let's get a little flavour.
When he first came out of prison, I thought, maybe I'll get my dad back. Maybe he's still a good person. Even after everything that happened. He was your friend, but you killed him. Why? But now, he's just some angry deaf man going around getting into fights.
You need to get Daniel Brennan back in prison. He's a murderer walking the streets. Recall him before it's too late.
More lies, more broken promises. So much for second chances, eh?
Oh, Martin, tell us about the drama.
Well, it's about the main character is Matthew Gurney, played by Matthew Gurney, who has been in prison for, as it said in the clip there, for killing his best friend. And essentially it's a kind of why done it rather than who done it. And
oh, I like that.
Yeah,
I
can't claim originality on that, that's for sure. But it's also got a kind of revenge thread running through it as well. But that kind of gives no real sense of what this is like, because I felt this was unlike virtually any other crime thing I'd ever seen before. It had a real kind of freshness to it. And I think that's because what it does is it explores this whole area of deafness. The writer is William Major, who's deaf himself, and it's essentially a bilingual film. It's in British Sign Language and English, and it makes amazing use of technology to explore this strange and quite frightening world of silence and distortion. So we experience the sound as the lead character experiences it for quite big chunks of the film. Has wonderful
love to
moments.
look at the script, though. Wouldn't it be fantastic to see?
Yes, and the writer talks about that, and he uses more than one type of sign language in it as well, which is like little subtleties that you wouldn't notice, and it explores things like how some of signing can mean different things in slightly different contexts, and so it's a very non-crude, subtle and sophisticated exploration of language and the challenges, but not challenges that makes it sound quite grim. It's not just the challenges, but the way that the deaf world bridges to the hearing world, and that makes the whole thing sound sort of very academic and dry. It is a really exciting thriller. I actually found it quite frightening, and I'm quite reasonable with, but I found it quite frightening, and I think that was partly because of the use of silence and the use of
there's distortion as well,
misinterpretation, and the way that moments of violence and confrontation, if you cannot hear, what on earth is that like? You don't know what people are saying.
Also, in addition to these different sort of storytelling techniques that we're seeing, it also awakened us to the world and the experiences, of course, of deaf prisoners. What were some of the things that you were sort of learned or impressed by, Murray, within the scripting?
Yeah, well, I think There is a danger with this, that we could get into the kind of type of world that politicians have got into with adolescence recently, where everybody's been scurrying around and saying everybody needs to watch Adolescence because it's an amazing documentary. It's like, no, it's a drama.
So Post Office scandal, of course. Yeah, they have the power to move politicians to action. That is what we're seeing.
They do, but I think some politicians are jumping on bits of bandwagon, doing it the wrong way. So let's be clear, it is a drama, but it's a very good one. But going back on that, one of the things I was fascinated by it. So a long time ago, one of my clients I used to look after was the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. And one of the things I learned during that work was 60% of young offenders in prison have a speech and language, quite often deaf, issue. And that brought it home to me in this, in terms of, you can see, we don't yet, I don't think we quite understand why he was, well, we do, he murdered someone. We don't quite understand the circumstances of what happened. And I hope we get to explore that, because I do wonder whether it's actually linked to him being deaf. And some of the things Martin talked about there is very interesting in this, that there are things that happen when you're not able to communicate properly, where misunderstandings happen, or people don't know what you've said or where things are going, and that can erupt, or you're frustrated because someone's not understanding you, and therefore that erupts into violence. So you do pick up that in it. But the other thing I realised very early on in watching this was you can't dual screen. So you can't be on your iPhone or your phone and trying to watch at the same time, which I'm very
give it your undivided. No texting. No texting
in this one, whether Jamie Dimon or not wants it.
Although texting is very important in the story, of course, because texting is one of the ways in which. Yeah, I mean, fascinating in all those ways. This is a production of Warp Films, who also made Adolescence, who are based in Sheffield. And for me, what's very interesting about it, as well as all the excellent qualities that Murray and Martin have talked about, is that the massive success of things like Baby Reindeer and Adolescence it's really opened up what is being done in the television space as well. This is the sort of material that I used to see a lot, but I used to see it on the International Film Festival circuit, where it was a sort of art house films that did this kind of thing, and they were great, but a handful of people saw them, the people who go to international film festivals and art house cinemas. And so to have this kind of thing that is really experimental in what it's doing, but really, really direct in its impact and its storytelling, that is just in people's living rooms challenging all their assumptions about what a thriller can be, it just fills me with joy. I think it's fantastic. So massive kudos to Warp Films, but also the performances are spectacular in this. And Matthew Gurney is amazing, but there's also people doing this bilingual work, like Anne-Marie Duff, who plays a hearing character who is fluent in sign language because her deceased husband and her daughter are both deaf. She's incredible because she's doing her performance, her vocal and physical performance. She's also speaking in sign language at the same time. So what's really interesting about it is you're able to watch these characters interacting on numerous levels at once. It just, it opens up a whole different world about communication.
The word fresh was used to describe this, and I think that is a really great way of looking at it and their performances. Reunion is available on BBC iPlayer.
Whim of a craving, come over you. Ooh, honeycomb, me want honeycomb, sweet and crunchy, toasted honey.
Post honeycomb cereal's part of this nutritious breakfast.
Where will you be when the craving strikes?
When Penny moves, Penny moves.
Did you see that?
And now in Slam and 3D, you can hang on to Penny's greatest moves. 3D Exploster posters, they're in your face. One free in each Mark box of Post honeycomb, frosted, and honey nut shredded wheat cereals. Some assembly required.
How's he do that?
I don't know.
Sounds.
Now, stay with us here on BBC Radio Scotland's Day. Later on at 11:30, we've got Breaking the News. Des Clark's guests include Mark Nelson and Kate Hammer. At 12 o'clock on FM and BBC Sounds, it's Off the Ball with Tam Cowan and Ray Bradshaw and their special guest, Jonathan Watson. Or choose digital radio for Sports Sound with live coverage of Celtic versus Kilmarnock. You can also ask your smart speaker to play BBC Radio Scotland Extra. Now, have you been watching the latest series of The White Lotus? White Lotus, I should say. I have been watching it. You would never know for the way I pronounce that. Anyway, actor Michelle Monaghan explained how director Mike White saw her character, who's part of a trio of female friends.
Do you know what Mike called us? The blonde blob.
He was in Thailand writing the show. He was at a resort somewhere, and he saw these 3 women who were vacationing together, and he said, I couldn't tell them apart, except when one of them would leave and they'd all start talking about the other one.
Well, that idea of hanging about with people who you can't really be bothered with has gained a little bit of traction this week, with journalist Sophie Morris talking about her own relationship with the friends she's known all her life. Now, in her 40s, she's facing up to the fact that one of her oldest friendships might have run its course and has resolved to make her peace with that fact. She's taken the approach of letting friendship drift if the other person isn't making the same effort to meet up. And if you never hear from them again, well, so be it. But others have pointed out that this feels a bit manipulative, and if you really can't be bothered with someone, you should just be upfront and tell them and end the relationship. Would you be upfront, Hannah? Have you ever broken up with someone, a friendship?
So many times. Yeah, I mean, I think once you're quite old, friendships just come and go, and you have functional friendships for certain periods of time when you're involved in something with certain people. You have friendships that pertain to other relationships that you're having, like who you're going out with, or what stage your kids are at. But in terms of sitting down and actually saying, this is why we have to end this now, not so much. No, I think the drifting thing happens and is perfectly natural and should not be worried about too much. I actually tend to think, how some people get really stressed out by other people's perfect relationships or perfect lives on social media. I think the kind of hype about friendship can be a bit oppressive in that way. I noticed it with my kids. Little girls are really fed this idea that the most important thing in your life is your friendship group and your friends and your friends and your friends. It's a massive thing in like little girls' culture for not so much little boys. And I feel like there's something a little bit like, it can be a little bit alienating if you're like, God, I don't live my life through like this friend group. I always remember when Sex and the City was on. This ages me, but this is these sort of pivotal things of culture. There was loads and loads of coverage around Friends and Sex and the City about like how it was your friend group was the important thing that was going to see you through your whole life. I don't know how many people it's really like that for. I know some people who have a core group of old friends that they've known forever. A lot of people, I think it's, shorter term and more, temporary. But I think also it's quite sensitive talking about this stuff, isn't it? Because you feel quite judged on how good your friendships are.
Well, I know. Just very briefly, I'll ask you, Martin, just to be brief. Do you know if friendship is run its course? Is it just the way that things are now? We lose touch.
Yeah, and I think people move around a lot more. You don't live necessarily in the same place that you went to school in and grew up in. And I think there is maybe a gender difference around this. I think men are maybe, I would hesitate to say here, and I could be contradicted, of course, I think men are more relaxed about this, that friendships do come and go. And I think that sort of societal, cultural pressure on friendships is very much driven in the kind of female cultural world.
Well, I would agree, but I'm very grateful for my girlfriends. Now, we are back after 11 with more on the big talking points of the week, including Black Mirror, accent snobbery, and those 3 little words, I love you. Plus, as the fire service releases figures on rescuing cats from trees, I want to know about the scrapes your pets have got into. Text me on 80295. Hello again. You're listening to Saturday Mornings on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Zara Janjua, and my guests, journalist Hannah McGill, public relations professional Murray MacDonald, and Martin Raymond of Cloudline PR. And the four of us will be here mulling over some of the big talking points of this week as Edinburgh University tackle accent snobbery. Have you ever felt judged for yours? David Tennant reflects on the power of those three little words, I love you. Plus, as the fire service release figures on rescuing cats from trees, I want to know about the scrapes your pet has got into, whether they got stuck somewhere, scuffed something they shouldn't, or got into, I don't know, some kind of mischief. Just let me know. You can drop me a text on 80295 that's charged at your standard message rate. Or, of course, we would love for you to send us a wee WhatsApp 08085 92 95 00. Now, can you believe it's been 14 years since Charlie Brooker's science fiction thriller Black Mirror first burst onto our screens? Most of the anthology is united by one theme, the perils of a not too distant future where unchecked technological advances and human reliance on them leads to human life becoming in some way distorted. It began live on Channel 4, later moving to Netflix, where this week season 7 was unleashed onto the world with 6 new episodes, one in particular starring Peter Capaldi as a man whose life has become intertwined with characters from a computer game. Let's get a flavour of Plaything.
In 1994, Colin Rittman cancelled the long-awaited Thronglets.
I know it's tough for people to hear he destroyed one of his games. All the discs, everything.
It alters your neuronal structure. The mind is a computer. Suddenly, you're not just more receptive. You become a receiver.
I never got a chance to play Thronglets. He just had this grand vision.
You hatch one. You'll nurture and you'll care for it until it replicates life itself.
He wanted the little yellow gerbil things to be able to learn.
Listen.
Humans consider artificial life to be somehow less than them.
Listen. They're talking to you. Listen. Listen.
It's so disturbing, isn't it? Even the trailer, I think you can tell it's sort of disturbing. I think that's what it aims to do, isn't it, Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you say in the intros, Zara, it's all been about this sort of the way in which we all have these creeping fears about these technologies that we allow into our lives, and Black Mirror just takes them all to the scariest possible extreme, and somehow we come out of that feeling better.
And what about this episode, Plaything? Did you actually watch the one before it, which was Bandersnatch? Because this is episode 4.
Right. So Bandersnatch has some of the same characters have come through from Bandersnatch. So Colin Pittman, this game developer who you heard briefly in the clip there, this is a sort of furtherance of this character, and it's kind of founded in an idea which some people might know about if people are listening who are a little too online or a little tech nerdy might be aware of a concept which we're not supposed to talk about because it's very dangerous to talk about it. But the concept is that there is in the future an all-powerful AI being that will judge us all based upon whether we helped it to exist or not. So those of us who worked on its development will be fine, and those of us who didn't will be in terrible trouble. And as soon as you know about it, you have a responsibility to work on it, and it is going to take over. And this concept is the basilisk, and it's mentioned very briefly in the show, or Rocco's basilisk, because the person who came up with this thought experiment and talked about it online was called Rocco. And this dates back to 2010. This is from before when AI was like a real present thing in all our lives. But it is this idea that we will ultimately all end up enslaved by an intelligence that is much more powerful than we are. And so in this show, it sort of takes the form of this, and it's so wonderful because Black Mirror loves old technology, and Black Mirror loves like doing these really accurate. So it's a sort of 90s games world in a sort of turn of the millennium, running up to the turn of the millennium. So it's like all these old computer systems, and that's part of the pleasure of it, I think, is sort of watching that. And then, yeah, as you heard, this it's not exactly a game, but it's this little community of things. And as soon as the character played by Peter Capaldi becomes responsible for these little things, he has to devote his entire life to looking after them. And of course, that creates a great weight of responsibility.
Yes. Let's talk about Peter Capaldi, because my goodness, he would have been in hair and makeup for some time, I think, for this role, Murray.
He looks a bit rough, doesn't he?
Just unlike you've ever seen him before.
Yeah, and you first see him near the start of this episode where he's in a wine shop, I think it is. He tries to steal a bottle of wine, and he just looks like any old kind
Malcolm
of drunken...
Tucker had been left in a cave for some time.
Exactly. The kind of old wino, and he's not able to steal a bottle of wine and drops it, and he's then slumped on the floor and then gets arrested, and it kind of goes on from there. So yeah, he is brilliant, and I think his acting in this, I think, is phenomenal. And I think
he's a peculiar character, isn't he?
Oh, it's a really odd character. You don't want to like him, but you kind of do. I got really quite drawn into it though, because as a kid growing up, I played lots of computer games, and there was a few
what did
that
you
kind
play?
of. So well, the one that made me think about this was Lemmings. So it looks they look a bit like Lemmings. So that kind of went, oh gosh, that's you have to look after them in a way as well. But then it's also a bit Tamagotchi-ish. I don't know if you ever had a Tamagotchi.
Oh, I loved mine. Yeah.
And you had, again, I killed lots of them. I mean, not on purpose, but because you forget to water them or do all these various things. So it's got a bit of that in it. But I actually still play a game called SimCity Build It, which is kind of all these little Sims you've got to look after and you've got to build things for them. And I do wonder, are they seeping into my brain already? And they're making sure what I've got to do here. But yeah. So it is a bit, it is beauty of Black Mirror. It is frighteningly close to reality, but takes it into this scary dystopian world.
Love that. And Martin, does it raise any sort of questions for you, not just about AI, but maybe about what we consider to be life forms or what we give importance to, or were you sort of in an existential crisis following the episode?
No, the question that was in my mind was how long has it got to go? I was looking at the bar along the bottom. I've never been gripped by science fiction or speculative fiction as it's called now. I just think there's so much in the actuality of now that is crazy and mysterious and amazing and so on, that you don't have to project any further into the future. I love Peter Capaldi in this. I'd take a controversial position on this, but where I'm in agreement is that Peter Capaldi, I mean, I could watch Peter Capaldi in, I don't know, a compilation of life insurance adverts. I mean, he's just such a brilliant actor. I think one of the best Scottish actors working today. Just absolutely amazing. And this was a really challenging role he had here, and I loved all of that. But I was just, it's one of these things, you know, where you say, oh, what did you think of that? And you go, oh, that was interesting. And nothing kills anything quicker than saying, oh, it was interesting. You know, it's the faint praise thing.
Like nothing's been resolved.
I wasn't gripped by this. Now, I have to say, I've never watched a Black Mirror before. This is the very first one I watched. So I thought I'd give it a second chance, and I watched one called Eulogy, which is, I don't know which number it is in the present series. And that I was gripped by, and I was quite moved by it, and it explored the whole area of memory and how memory changes. But I felt the technology bit in that was kind of almost an intrusion into how we make and retain, and I just felt that actually as a little drama about how you misremember and remember things, it could have been done without any technology in it at all. So I'm kind of unmoved by technology and conspiracy theories.
Seem very underwhelmed by this.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
I have to say I'm slightly sad about, because I am a big fan, and I have been for the last 14 years. In the same way that with Inside Number 9, you know, episodes that you can dip into and come back to, there's something really wonderful about these. And Hannah, this has been incredibly successful, Black Mirror. Why is that?
Well, it's not a new format. I think the funny thing is, although we think of it as being sort of bleeding edge because it's about tech, it really is. It's an old-fashioned short story format. It's tales of the unexpected. It's these little stories that they happen to be about tech. But I kind of agree with Martin that I'm not sure that the tech aspect is the most important thing. I think some of them are very well written little dramas, and some of them are not. And essentially, I'm not a huge Black Mirror fan just because I tend to think of it as more, you know, it's sort of working out ideas rather than it always feels too fixed in an idea. But at the same time, I think, you know, the idea of being responsible for feeling and thinking AI is not way off distant in the mysterious future. It's real. It's very, very close to being upon us now. So I think that the relevance of the technology is part of what people like about it. But essentially, the format is quite old school. It is a good little story with a twist at the end. Also, because it has been successful, they can get really, really good actors, and everyone knows, Black Mirror took this big step up when it became very popular in America.
Yes.
And that can destroy something, but it can also mean that it can get access to. But Capaldi is a really big part of the draw with this one, I think, because he does a performance that there are lots of ways to do this performance in quite a cliche way, but his line readings are so unpredictable and he's so sweet and sort of lovable in the role that it really transforms your emotional engagement with it. So I think it is partly just about who they get for particular episodes. So I think that is part of the appeal, is that Charlie Brooker wrote this one himself as well, and he is writing to the knowledge that he can get great performers to make these really memorable characters. So I think that is part of it.
Very good. And just very briefly, Murray, will you keep watching?
Yeah, I definitely will. And the good thing with Black Mirror is there's been a lot of seasons of them, so you can go back and kind of dip in and out them on Netflix. But it is something that polarizes people. I think not everybody loves it. I mean, there are equal groups of people who it freaks out and they just don't like it.
Oddly, it's not one that I can binge. I wouldn't binge it in the way that I have done with White Lotus, let's say. But that's Black Mirror, available on Netflix. Still to come here on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Zara Janjua. Have you ever felt judged because of your accent? And have you ever had the fire service out to rescue a cat from a tree? We want to know. Text me on 80295. Now, we were talking about letting friendships go earlier, and Jane in Lothian has texted us to say, I remember hearing a piece on BBC Radio Scotland's Sunday morning show about friendships being for a season, a reason and a lifetime. It made complete sense and helped me realise it is entirely normal and indeed natural to move on from so-called friends and to appreciate the important ones who stick by you for a lifetime. Well, that's a very nice sentiment. I hope you've got plenty of those with you now, Jane. Next, let's move on. David Tennant, who touched a nerve with the nation this week during an episode of his podcast.
Even when my parents were dying, it was so hard to say I love you, and it's quite sad. I found it difficult, and they didn't really say it back, and that's not because they didn't. It's just because it's just an upbringing. It's just a way of being, and a moment in time. I'm very glad that our kids will be annoyed that we say it too much. I think that's definitely the way to be.
So we're talking about the impact of this. Is it generational? What's the experiences? Martin, did your parents tell you that they loved you?
No, I don't think they did, and I don't. I think my mother wrote it in letters to me. That's really old school. That's how long ago that was.
Lovely.
But I don't recall them ever saying it. And a bit like David Tennant has said in this interview, I don't feel any great sense of regret around that, because I knew that they did love me, and they did that in everything they did, and just in the way that they spoke to me normally. And it was almost, I kind of feel it's like, well, they didn't have to say it because I knew that. And even we were having big arguments, we were falling out, which we did a lot, when I was like a teenager and so on. But I still knew that was underpinned by a kind of emotional connection, which was really strong. And I'm quite old school in this, and I just feel that it's not so much about whether you actually say these words or not. And I don't think, I might have said this to my own children at some point, but I certainly didn't make a habit of doing it. But I hope that in the way that we interacted and in the way that I did things with them and for them, that was strongly communicated. I didn't need to say it.
Actions speak louder than words.
Well, I didn't. I was trying to avoid that, but that is absolutely the case. Yeah. It is actually worth saying it in that way, because I think that is actually it is, and I think, what's worse is if you use these words in a superficial way, and that's a
they can lose their meaning. Well, do you know, we were covering this on the phone in yesterday on mornings, and really interesting to hear a range of opinions from people who actually spoke a lot about the discipline that they receive from their family, and sometimes quite harsh, actually, but they never felt unloved despite all of that. And I thought it's interesting that we do go into the feelings. Is it more important to feel loved or to be told that you're loved, Murray?
Gosh, that's a big question. So, yeah, I think it is about the feeling. And I think it's too easy. And so we're in a generation now where it is the done thing for parents and people to say, I love you all the time and so on. And actually it can be said too easily in a way. Mm-hmm. So I do think that the more important thing is the action, and it is the feeling of being part of a family, being a son or a daughter, and knowing you've got that kind of loving relationship and the protection and all the things that come with that around about you. So there is definitely a generational thing in that. And I think people of my age and above, maybe even a bit younger than me, I think did come from families. I don't know if it's a Scottish thing. I don't think it is. I think it's definitely a British generational, maybe even European thing, where it wasn't talked about in the same way, but we're now in this world where it is much more common for people to be affirming that by what they are saying. Deep down, is it any different? No, I don't think it is.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder, Hannah, you're obviously at home looking after your kids today. When you had your children, were there things that you decided to adopt that your parents did with you, or was there a conscious decision to reject some of the behaviours and things that your parents had when they were raising you?
My parents tend to listen to the show, so I'm not going to go into this. But I think the actions speak louder thing is all very well, but it's still nice. I know my husband loves me, but it doesn't mean I don't want him to say it. Yeah. So I think there's a good thing about articulation. I think that the lack of articulation has done more harm than good to generations of British. I do think there's a specific Scottish hesitancy about it. I think there are also class-related things about this, that some social classes are more comfortable with being floral and flamboyant in what they say to each other, and other people are more packed away. I believe in a degree of unpacking. So I very consciously did. I do say it to my kids, and they say it back, and I feel self-consciousness and embarrassment about that to a degree, because it wasn't necessarily something that I grew up around. But I think it is a good thing, because I think once you have lived long enough to have seen some loss, you're aware that it's really nice to have said things and to say them regularly, even if it feels excessive. So I don't have a problem with it seeming a bit OTT to some people, because I think it's a good adjustment. I think not all adjustments for added emotion are good, but I think that this one is good.
Well, I might be very needy, but I do feel like I need to hear it. So I'm very grateful that my mother always said it to me.
On BBC iPlayer. Breakfast
with Jamie Theakston
and Amanda Holden.
It's been over a month since Sydney Christmas won Britain's Got Talent. Let's just remind ourselves of the moment she won.
The winner of Britain's Got Talent 2024 is Sydney Christmas!
And she joins us now.
Hello, everybody. I still got goosebumps.
Unbelievable.
I still fist bumped like that was the first time. Yeah. That was just the most amazing moment.
Unbelievable. I'm still not over it. I don't think it's actually sunk in yet. Everything's just been like, go, like a rocket. It's just taken off, which is amazing. But, oh, my goodness.
Do you remember what was sort of going through just hearing that back then, what was going through your mind at that moment?
Just be over. Because it was the longest. How long was that? It was counting down from 11.
They do it for such drama, because they
Lots coming up on the radio station today at 11:30. Breaking the news with Des Clark, with guests including Mark Nelson and Kate Hammer. At 12 o'clock on FM and BBC Sounds, it's Off the Ball with Tam Cowan and Ray Bradshaw and their special guest Jonathan Watson. Or choose BBC Radio Scotland Extra for Sports Sound with live coverage of Celtic versus Kilmarnock. At 7 o'clock, Gary Innes is here with Take the Floor. He has a great session from Gordon Shand. and his Scottish dance band. And on tomorrow's Sunday morning programme, Tony Kearney hears the spiritual life of esteemed Scottish literary historian Jenny Calder. And as Madonna and Elton John bury the hatchet after over 20 years, Tony's Faith Forum panel look at why we bear grudges. That's here for you tomorrow morning from 8 o'clock. I'm Zara Janjua with you this morning on BBC Radio Scotland with my guests Hannah McGill, Martin Raymond and Murray MacDonald. Now, what's Scotland's most mimicked accent? Could it be this guy?
This isn't easy to say. My name's Gary, and I'm addicted to chips.
No! Oh, that's nonsense. You can't be addicted to chips.
Dad, don't deny me, I'm an addict. Once I start, I just can't stop getting that way.
The wonderful, wonderful Gary Tank Commander. But whilst it might be well to have a good mimic of fictional characters, there is actually a serious side to this, with Scottish students at Edinburgh University saying they've been mocked for their accents, experienced bias in classrooms, and have often felt the need to tone down or even change the way they naturally speak. A group of students called the 93% Club, which stands for the percentage of people in the UK who are state school educated, has been working with the university to provide accent bias training sessions for staff. Now, I'm interested because, you know, listening to all of us on the programme today, we're fairly well pronounced, I guess we would say, wouldn't we? Yes. So have you, Martin, ever felt maybe that you've experienced accent bias, perhaps even south of the border?
Well, it's like everything. Everybody goes, oh, you don't sound very Scottish when you're in Scotland. And you go to England, people go, oh my goodness me, it's Rob Roy McGregor.
Can't understand a word you're saying.
And so, yeah, but I think that's the thing, really, isn't it? It's kind of about context, isn't it? It's where you are. And I mean, I love this stuff. I'm not going to talk about this for hours and hours and hours because I think yes, you shouldn't judge people, and if it comes to mockery, I mean, that's bullying. That's in a different territory. Mm-hmm. But I think it is really interesting to interpret the way people speak and the way that I very deliberately, I remember maybe in my very early 20s, I very deliberately started pronouncing my T's quite clearly because I felt that I was doing a glottally stop thing and I was missing out the T's, and I was conscious that there was a judgment being made about the way that I was speaking, and some.
It's very useful now with voice activated technology, though, isn't it, to be able to pronounce correctly?
Well, exactly, because it's kind of about clarity, isn't it? It's all about clarity. So I'm willing to confess here that I actually did deliberately kind of work to moderate the way that I was speaking, and I think being able to speak and be able to be clear about what you're saying is quite important. But we're all bilingual, aren't we? I mean, we all speak in different ways in different circumstances. It's more than bilingual; it's multilingual, because depending who we're speaking to, we talk in different ways.
Well, I think a lot of us can be like that, but chameleon, change in our environments.
Yeah.
But actually, Murray, really a lot of the time, the accent we have, when you meet somebody, you make assumptions, don't you, based on what they present to you. So, what assumptions have been made about you and your accent? And have you made assumptions on other people? Is there an accent you just don't like?
So I could sit here and say, no, I never make assumptions. Of course we do. Of course we all do. We do it about how they look, how they dress, how they speak. We all make those assumptions. And I think I would like to think, I mean, you definitely notice someone's accent. You might in your head go, oh, they're really Geordie or they're really Aberdonian or whatever they are. But I don't think it makes me think differently about them, unless it's someone who you're really struggling to understand. I've had a few people over the years. There was a person up in Shetland. I was working up there once, and there was this chap speaking to me.
Glorious accent.
It is glorious, but I actually it sounded like a different language. I had no idea what he was saying at all to me.
That's my childhood accent. That's how I spoke when I was a child, as Shetlandic. So I'm very familiar with people
anymore.
Going, what accent is that? No, you see, because I dropped it.
You've shaken it. But the thing I do get sometimes is, so I I grew up in Inverness, so I've got a bit of a Highland lilt to my accent. My dad was from the islands, there's a bit of that in there.
Mm-hmm.
And people think I'm really posh. And it's like, no, I come from a very normal middle-class family. But some people, like particularly in like Glasgow or Edinburgh, they think, oh, you must be very posh with that accent. It's like, no.
Well, I'm interested to know from Hannah, because your accent changed. So you had this Shetlandic accent, and did it encompass? Did it change your feelings towards yourself or your identity or sense of self?
I was very small. I mean, I think for a lot of people, like if you've lived in a number of places, then you've been through this a few times. So I went from speaking Broad Shetland when I was a little child to then living in Germany for a while, speaking German, to then coming back and going to school in Lincolnshire. And so I was paranoid about opening my mouth all the time because my accent made no sense to anyone. So now I have a sort of broadly Midlands English accent, and I live in Scotland, and people think I'm posh just because I speak with an English accent. So I tend to think, like Murray says, it's very, you're not necessarily getting accurate information on someone's background from their accent, even if you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I've learned that over the years, that because my accent doesn't tell anyone anything about how well off I am or what education I had. It just doesn't. If they think it does, they're wrong, because it just doesn't. It's just a mixture of different things. I went to a comprehensive school, you know. So I think because of my own experience, I try not to make assumptions, and very often you're wrong.
Well, it's very good to hear, Hannah, of course, because you work with students as well, and that's the environment that this was in. But let's move on. Now, there's one cat who's constantly finding himself in trouble with a man in uniform.
Hello? Yes? Officer Dibble? Well, this is his answering service. May I take a message?
All right, Top Cat, on your feet. I caught you this time.
But for Scotland's cats, it's not Officer Dibble, but the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service's figures released this week reveal that their firefighters have been called out to over 500 incidents of rescuing domestic pets from heights. Most of them, apparently, cats up trees. Martin, what do you make of this?
Well, my neighbour's cat, it was called Lucky, black cat, was once stuck up a tree in our garden and was attacked by 7 aggressive crows. Like really aggressively. And my wife said, oh, let's phone the fire brigade, get the cat down. The cat's obviously stuck up there. And I said, don't be ridiculous. You can't phone the fire brigade to get cats out of trees. That only happens in the Bash Street Kids at Beano. And so it turns out she was correct. So I've been having a quite hard time because she was absolutely correct about this. The cat was fine, by the way. It got down eventually. The crows got fed up and went away.
Well, I'm very glad there was a nice end to that story. But certainly this does seem to be the case. Lots of people calling out the fire brigades to rescue their cats. It has been, sadly, this is the end of the show now. It's been so lovely to have you all on. My thanks to Hannah McGill, Martin Raymond and Murray McDonald. Shereen Nanjiani is back with you from 10 o'clock next Saturday. But for now, we're heading into some comedy. It is, of course, Breaking the News with Des Clark.